Tired of doing the same thing day after day? Seeing the same people talk about the same things? Hearing politicians promise the same BS?
Don't let anybody tell you that it's corporations and businesses that create jobs.
My change in party will enable me to be re-elected.
Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women all across this country.
Well, you don't have to anymore. Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, your guide to traveling, investing, and living beyond borders, where we talk about living the life that you want to live, where you want to live it. From beautiful San Miguel de Allende, smack in the middle of Mexico, with your hosts, Jonathan Lockwood and James Guzman.
Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders. This is Jonathan Lockwood here with James Guzman.
How you doing, Jonathan? Feeling good this morning. I've been drinking some bulletproof coffee. I think you have as well, so I think we're hyped up and ready to go.
Yeah, we're both on the bulletproof. I did two today. I'm on my second one right now, and I don't usually do that, so I'm feeling really super energetic. But guess where I'm going tonight?
Where's that?
La Mezcaleria.
Oh, very nice, of course. I should have guessed.
Just about my favorite restaurant here in San Miguel de Allende, owned by a young local couple. That guy, is he Mexican, that blonde guy?
No, I don't think so.
I think he's from South America or something. I can't quite tell. But, oh my God, you guys, if you ever come to San Miguel de Allende, you have got to check this place out. It's kind of a small place, like a tapas place, but they do beef, they do amazing vegetables, and they do shrimp, and they do this pork rib, and they've got these oysters now. And the mezcal is delicious. I just love it.
Lots of artisan beer there as well.
Oh, that's right. You've got the artisanal beer, which I love. So anyway, going there tonight, looking forward to it. Anybody wanting to come to San Miguel, you got to check out La Mezcaleria. And they're not paying for this. They don't even know about this podcast.
That's right. Hopefully they'll learn one day.
All right. So our guest today is Glen Lee Roberts. He is a real-life man without a country, an author, activist, and internet pioneer who has built a successful network of websites focused mainly on the Americas and featuring self-empowerment, social networking, and cultural reporting. Glen's most recent book is How to Renounce Your U.S. Citizenship in 2 Easy Steps. He has appeared on hundreds of radio and television shows, such as ABC World News Tonight, and has been written about in many newspaper and magazine articles, including the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Associated Press, and many others. Welcome, Glen.
Good afternoon.
Glen, can I ask, do you prefer Glen Lee Roberts or just Glen Roberts?
Whatever works for you.
All right.
Usually I go by Senor Glen because it's easier for people where I live.
I like that sound. I've only been in Mexico 5 months, but Senor, sometimes, the maid will call me Senor Jonathan. I like that. Yeah. So we want to talk to you. We've been excited to talk about you because a lot of the people who listen to the Borderless podcast, and James and I myself, we're interested in living as freely as possible. One of those things might involve the idea of renouncing their U.S. citizenship. And you actually did this, didn't you, Glen?
Yes, I did it a little bit over a year ago.
Excellent. So I thought we could start out by asking the broad question, why would a person want to renounce their U.S. citizenship?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer because there's so many possibilities. I think the first point is it's the right of every American to renounce their citizenship if they choose to do that. And the reason you renounce, the why, is not a part of the process. It's not asked. None of the forms have a question where you have to write down why you're renouncing your U.S. citizenship. The U.S. State Department sees the procedure as a very personal one. You have to do it for yourself. An attorney can't do it for you. You can't do it for your kids. It has to be yourself doing it, but why you're doing it is not important to them. Many of the reasons we read about in the newspapers relate to taxes and tax forms or rich people doing it for monetary reasons. Many people do it for political or personal reasons. In the past, people have done it to avoid the draft and those type of things. So it's an issue that really you need to make the decision for yourself. And if you feel it's the right decision, the opportunity is there for you to renounce your U.S. citizenship.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out also, although it might seem drastic to a lot of people have actually been doing it, and it seems like there are a lot of people that are looking into it. I know that this year there's been a 221% just so far increase in the amount of people that have renounced, and that is the official number. As far as I know, they have the kind of the U.S. Treasury Department's name and shame list, which this is supposed to be the list where when people renounce, they put out these names, and it's supposed to be you're shaming them. But it's kind of backfired on them because there's been so many people renouncing that it's been kind of embarrassing to the government. So a lot of people speculate that these numbers are manipulated. They're much higher than the one that they actually put on the list, and they know this because they look at the individual embassies outside of the United States where you have to renounce, and they could see that there seems to be a lot more people renouncing there on their lists than there are on the United States list. And just from the U.S. Treasury's list, it's been a 221% increase just from last year. And there was also a recent survey done, and it was by an independent financial group. And out of the 7.6 million people abroad, they said from their survey, it was 73% have thought about or are going to renounce. So from 6.6 million people, that would mean that 5.5 million people in the world are thinking about doing this. So it might not be as crazy or drastic as many people might think.
It's certainly a hot topic. I don't like the words name and shame for that list. And I think that sort of gets to some of the cultural issues in the United States where people are ashamed to exercise their rights. The right to renounce is in federal law. There's a straightforward procedure for it. And I think people that exercise their rights, whether it be the right to renounce or any other right that they have as an American, they should be proud of it. And they shouldn't feel ashamed if their name gets published on a list. I believe that these counts and the people trying to keep track of how many people renounced at the embassy, how many the Treasury Department published, what the counts in the FBI system are. One of the things that they're missing on this is the processing backlogs. For example, I renounced in June of 2013, and it took Washington 15 months to put their final stamp of approval on it. So there was a 15-month delay from when I renounced, when I received my certificate of loss of nationality, and when Washington finally said okay. I have yet to appear on any of those Treasury Department lists. So when the figures say there were 2,999 people that renounced in 2013, that didn't include me. And it looks like I will be included sometime in 2015, if not later. Because apparently the Treasury Department also has their backlog.
Yeah. So let me ask you: did you have to make an appointment and wait for a while to renounce? Because I've heard from people that, for instance, the Toronto office, do you have to wait more than a year? Once you're ready to renounce, you make an appointment out for more than a year.
It depends on the embassy. So if you're in Toronto or another location where there's a significant backlog, you may consider taking a trip to another country and renouncing there if it's within your means to do that, to avoid the backlog. For me, I scheduled an appointment through the embassy in Asuncion, Paraguay, through their website, and then followed up with email and was told that they were sorry, but there was nobody in the office that week that could handle a renunciation. And I then had them schedule an appointment for me for a day when there was somebody that would be there. And it was the following week. There was no backlog. And from my rough computations, I would say that maybe 2 or 3 people a year renounce in Asuncion, Paraguay. So the issue for waiting isn't because of too many renunciations, but because they may not have somebody in the embassy that can do it.
Right. And I know that recently they have increased the fee for expatriation from $450 to $2,350, which is a 221% increase. And the reason that they have done that, they have said, is because they've had this backlog and because of demand.
Well, one of the things that I saw, and I believe it was in the State Department's notice in the Federal Register about the increase, is they noted that they had to check several databases and conduct 2 intensive interviews. And there's actually 2 ways you can lose your nationality, your U.S. nationality. One is you can go to the embassy and renounce, which is what I did. And that's basically you go to the embassy, they explain to you why it's a bad idea. There's a form that has 12 points that they read to you. And then you can return a week or more later and actually renounce. And the act of renunciation is taking an oath, raising your right hand and reading a page. And at the completion of that, you sign it, it's notarized, and you're no longer a U.S. citizen. That process is very clear, straightforward, and direct. There's nothing I would call an intensive interview. And in my book, I included copies of all of the forms that I filled out in the process. And these are copies of the originals with my signature and the signature of the United States Consul. There's another way you can lose your U.S. nationality, and that's by doing something. For example, taking an oath to a foreign country, serving in a foreign military. If you do any of these number of things with the intention of losing your U.S. nationality, then that act is an act of renunciation, relinquishing your nationality. If you later go to the embassy and make them aware that you performed this act with the intention of renouncing, then they will issue a certificate of loss of nationality. That, I understand, could involve intensive interviews and investigation, because the embassy would have to determine if you did this act, if you took an oath to a foreign government, and if you did it with the intention of renouncing. And I also believe for that reason, it's best to actually go and renounce, because then you directly in front of the consular officer renounced, and there's no question about your motives or what you did.
Okay. So there's an alternative way to renounce that I didn't know about. Interesting. But you ran down for us the basic reasons why a person might want to renounce their U.S. citizenship. Do you mind sharing with us, why did you do it?
I think the reason I did it is I felt I had outgrown the United States. That I had lived outside the United States for about 11 years, and I became a different person. I was no longer the angry, fearful person. I was no longer the privacy rights activist that was publishing about all of the invasions of privacy and abuses by the federal government and being threatened by them because of the expression of my viewpoints. I became more healthy and more at peace with myself, but I felt I was carrying a burden around. Some of it, of course, financial for paying taxes in the United States, but also more of a spiritual burden of having a responsibility for everything the United States did. And of course, when interacting with people, people would often ask me, in a sense, to justify this or that thing that the United States was doing. And myself, I felt so disconnected from the United States that to try to explain why the United States would do one thing or another was very uncomfortable. When I renounced, I chose to provide a written statement explaining why I was renouncing. And one of the things I noted in that is that for me, I felt that the United States was a foreign country because I had been away so long, and I had. I can't say that I became Paraguayan because I live in Paraguay, but I've become a mix between the cultures. And I also equated the process for me to be similar to getting divorced, where when you're married, your spouse, there's a degree of comfort you get even though the relationship isn't working. And when you get divorced, you have a feeling that, the future is going to be better, but for the moment, it's a little bit uneasy to break that bond. And for me, the process of renouncing my U.S. citizenship was very similar to that. There was this bond I had with the United States, but it wasn't doing anything for me. But I'd always had it, so there was a degree of comfort in that. And I felt that after I renounced, that in the future I would feel much freer without that. And I think that's certainly the case.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. I mean, I would think, I don't see why anybody would be against somebody, they don't live in the United States, they don't feel connected to it, they want to renounce. But, I think that a lot of people have hesitation, and I'm interested in hearing what maybe some of the reactions are that you've had from people, especially Americans, when you've told them that you've renounced. Has it been a positive, a very negative reaction?
I think surprisingly, there's been very little negative reaction, even starting with the U.S. Consul. My anticipation going into the embassy to renounce was that it may be a situation of conflict. And I've seen many people write blogs, people who have not gone through the process, that also have that idea that when you go to the United States Embassy to renounce, the personnel there are going to be aggressive and difficult, because in a sense they're the very patriotic American, and here you are coming to say, I don't want to be a part of it. My experience was really the complete opposite. And when I met the U.S. Consul for the very first time, his first words to me were something along the lines of, I can see life for you in South America has been very good. And he recognized from seeing an old passport picture and what I had written in my statement that as a person, I had improved as I was living outside the United States. And that he didn't see as an official of the United States and obviously as a very patriotic type person, he didn't seem a reason to have a conflict with me about that. And I think sort of that continued with respect to my friends and people that I know. In South America, some people are shocked to learn that an American renounced, because of course there's a tendency for those in Latin America to have a dream of at least visiting, if not living in the United States.
That is surprising. That is something I didn't expect. I would have thought that you would have received a bit more blowback. But I guess as I think about it now, in knowing many non-U.S. people outside the U.S., foreign countries, I can understand why they would be surprised, because so many of them still would like to get to the U.S.
But there's others that I think are impressed that an American would stand up that way to the United States.
Right.
With respect to, for example, on Facebook, where I have a number of friends, people that I went to grade school with that I don't really know anymore, or people that when I was living in the United States were my friends. I was expecting, I didn't have any particular people in mind, but I thought that I would have some negative responses to that. And really there haven't been any. And in fact, a couple of people that read my book that I don't believe have any interest in renouncing or living outside the United States seem to find it interesting. There may have been some people that unfriended me, but nobody in that group of people that I grew up with or knew in the United States sent me a nasty email telling me that I was a evil, wicked person for doing this.
Glenn, you've given us some good things for people to expect as they go through this process, or not to expect. But let me ask you this. What are some of the primary hesitations you found that some people have about renouncing? People who are of a mind to do what you did, but are hesitant to. Can you help us out with that?
I think, and a lot of people probably won't like it if I say this, but I think from what I see, many people get caught up in the anger and the fear about FACTA, about the taxes, about saying goodbye to the United States, that they never get the point of doing it. There's one person I know, and he explained how he was going to go into the embassy to renounce, and he was going to explain to them about all the problems of FACTA and so forth. And that's really not what this process is about. This process is a simple, direct, straightforward method by which you can simply step outside of all of that drama. And I don't think taking that drama to the embassy is going to make the process easier for you. And you need to, I think, come to grips with yourself. Is this something that is right for you? Is this something that you want to do? And if so, then do it. If the political issues, be they FACTA related, or if you're against the military of the United States, if those issues are important for you, you need to come to grips with those issues. And if that means renouncing, then go ahead and renounce. But I think we get caught up with all of this drama, with all of this anger, with all of this fear. And that's one thing I see coming from the media as well. If you read any of the articles on the topic and then go down to the comments, it's a war of words between everybody. And the degree of anger seems to be so high that it interferes with our abilities to make a decision.
Glenn, what about people who have made the decision that they would like to renounce, but still have some hesitations, reasons why they're maybe a little afraid to renounce? What are some of those reasons why they would hesitate?
Let's say, like, for instance, getting back into the United States. Have you had any, I guess you haven't gone back, but would a person, I guess it depends on what citizenship they had. You have to now get a visa to enter the country, maybe to visit your family or friends or something like that.
That's, of course, a very good question. And I believe if you already had a European passport, that you could just enter the United States with the visa waiver system as any other European. If you didn't have a passport within the visa waiver system, then, of course, like any other foreigner, you would need to apply for and receive a visa. And that's something that's not a guarantee. And there's a law that was passed a number of years ago, which suggests if someone renounces for tax reasons, that they be denied a visa. Although they haven't apparently implemented the law, the U.S. visa application asks if you've ever renounced U.S. citizenship, for tax purposes.
That's interesting because you said that they don't have any place on the form to provide a reason why, so they only ask you why if you want a visa to return.
Well, they don't ask you why. They only ask you if you did it for tax reasons.
Okay.
But I think as everything tax related in the United States, that's a very difficult question. In the past, and they've changed the tax laws with respect to renunciation several times, but in the past, with respect to tax issues, your reason for renouncing, whether it was for tax reasons or not, was part of the process. But it wasn't a question they asked you. They didn't say, did you renounce for tax purposes? They instead had a formula, and they did a computation as to how much taxes you had paid in the past 10 years, and how that would have been different if you hadn't been a United States citizen. And if it was significantly different, that was their call to judgment, as if it was for tax purposes. Under the new system, how that question gets answered is completely unclear.
Yeah, and then if you say I did because of tax reasons, then they just don't give you a visa, there's no law or anything. I mean, that's a pretty bitchy thing to do.
And of course, does tax reasons mean the filing requirements of FACTA, or does it mean to pay less taxes? Yeah. So once you bring the tax issue in, everything becomes complicated. And for some people, that will be a significant issue, whether they can visit the United States. There's a few people that indicate they want to renounce and then return to the United States as an illegal alien because they feel illegal aliens are treated better than Americans. Right. I think that's going to lead to a very different view of life if one were to try that. And if the State Department believes that it's your intention to renounce and then return to live in the United States without residency in the United States, they will deny the application as they don't believe it's your intent to actually renounce.
We're talking with Glen Lee Roberts, author of How to Renounce Your U.S. Citizenship in 2 Easy Steps. Glen, as we said, a lot of people who listen to the Borderless podcast may be interested in this subject. It's been something I've been looking at myself and considering. But when we come back from this little break we're going to take, we want to talk to you about stuff that we're ordinarily more focused on. That is, people who choose to live outside of the U.S. or outside of their borders and do business and create a life outside of it. So we'll talk to you about some of those things. But right now, today's Borderless podcast is being brought to you by the Condescending Group, your online leader in moral superiority. The Condescending Group wants to encourage each and every one of you to challenge your fundamental assumptions on just what dishonesty is. Their firm position on questions of falsehood? Who's to say? There are literally thousands of ways to justify anything you do, and in the end, it all comes down to this: look to the group. Are there other people who do it? Have those people found ways to rationalize it? Well, there you go. Remember, look to the group, the Condescending Group. They care more than you. Okay, so we're back to the Borderless podcast. We're talking with Glen Lee Roberts, a real-life man without a country. He renounced last year, 2013, and again, he is the author of How to Renounce Your U.S. Citizenship in 2 Easy Steps. So this is what we'd like to talk about now, Glen. How long have you been living outside of the United States? Where did you decide to go, and why there?
Well, I've been living outside the United States since the end of 2002, and my last visit to the United States was in February of 2003. So it's been about 12 years that I've been living outside the United States. And unlike many people who look for a place to move to and make plans to leave the United States and have reasons for leaving the United States, I really left the United States by mistake. I went on a couple of vacations to Costa Rica. Each vacation got a little bit longer. And during my third vacation to Costa Rica, I rented a house, and then I returned to the United States for a week or two and went back to live in my house in Costa Rica. And at that point, my plan had been to stay in Costa Rica for a month or two and then go to the United States for a month or two and go back and forth. Though I never returned to the United States, it was that life became so much better, not so much in a monetary sense as it was comfortable. The stress was gone. At that time, I spoke absolutely no Spanish, not a single word of Spanish, and all of the newscasts that were available to me on television were in Spanish. So I was immediately cured of watching the nightly news. So I very rapidly got completely outside of that anger and fear culture that's pushed on the TV every night. And as I began to learn Spanish, it developed my social contacts in the local community in a way that was much different than my life had been in the United States. And I stayed in Costa Rica for about 2.5 years. And it would be possible for me to write a book about all of the bad things about Costa Rica. I won't get into any of the details, but I could say I had some very challenging and difficult experiences there. However, now when I sit back and look at those experiences, I can see that the problems I had there were much more with myself than with Costa Rica. I had arrived in Costa Rica as an American with the strong punctuality and work ethic, and you have to work more and earn more and be stressed more. And things have to be done. They have to be done now. They have to be done in the right way. And the next time they have to be done better. And that's a way of life, a way of thinking that doesn't connect with the Latin America way. And I think those 2.5 years and those difficult, challenging experiences I had in Costa Rica was really my process of letting go of the United States way, letting go of the U.S. culture, and becoming a relaxed person. So I don't want to lay that blame on Costa Rica for giving me a bad time when it was really it was my fault for being an American, for having that stress and those very fixed ideas of how things have to be. After Costa Rica, I went to Uruguay, and I was there for about 5.5 years. And it's a very nice country, although a little bit expensive. And 3.5 years ago, I moved to Paraguay and found it to be a very dynamic, energetic, comfortable place to live.
And you're in Asuncion now, Glenn?
I'm in Asuncion now. And because when I renounced my U.S. citizenship, I didn't have any other citizenship. I am now without any nationality at all. I am without a passport. So in fact, international travel right now is not a possibility for me. And I'm working on the process of getting an appropriate travel document so that I will be able to travel.
Oh, we've definitely got to talk to you about that. But let me talk to you a little bit more. You brought up Paraguay. So this is the place for the time being you've decided to live. You've been there 3.5 years. Talk a little bit more about why you like Paraguay.
It's very multicultural. There's 2 official languages, Spanish and Guarani. So as a person that doesn't speak Spanish perfectly, I fit in very well because many of the Paraguayans don't speak Spanish perfectly. Spanish is a second language for many of them. There's many ethnic restaurants, Indian, there was a Vietnamese one, Korean, many different cultural events as well from different groups. But the population is a very young population. And it's the Paraguayans all speak about they want to get an education and they want to make their lives better. And they want to do it here. They're not looking to get an education and then move to the United States or Spain to get a good job, but they want to build their country up. So it's a country that seems very interested in moving ahead. It's also the fastest growing population-wise country in South America. So there's a lot of activity. It does lack some in the infrastructure arena. And if you're insistent that everything has to be done precisely and in a certain way, it could be very difficult here because it's a slower moving process. And when it rains, the roads will flood, and you can either drive through a foot of water or you can wait till the rain subsides.
Yeah, and Paraguay also has a much easier residency program than many other South American countries, from my understanding.
I think it's probably one of the easiest, but the word easy is not a good word to use because there's lots of paperwork in all of the countries, and sometimes it's not as straightforward as it would seem. But the actual requirements of what you need for residency in Paraguay is very simple. And like all of the places, you need a copy of your birth certificate, a copy of a marriage certificate if you're married, and a police report from where you're from and possibly other countries. The difficult part for many people in various countries is that you have to show that you can support yourself. In some countries, when I was in Costa Rica, they wanted a $60,000 bank deposit. Others, if you earn a certain monthly amount, you can live there. In Paraguay, they require nothing more than a $5,000 deposit in a local bank account. So it's a very small amount from the American perspective. But if you put $5,000 in a bank, Paraguay considers you able to support yourself and will grant a permanent residency. When I was in Costa Rica, the residency I got, which required a $60,000 certificate of deposit, was a temporary residency that was good for maybe 3 years and didn't really provide any rights in Costa Rica, only the right to live there, not to work, and so forth. The residency in Paraguay is legal permanent residency, and you get an ID card that's identical to the Paraguayan ID cards. You can use that ID card to travel throughout much of South America. You can live here forever. You can work. You can really, except for vote, do everything that a Paraguayan can do. So the residency here is a very good, solid residency.
All right. And, for a lot of people that don't know, so what some people do is they structure their affairs in a way that, so if they have a location independent business or they're kind of living internationally, they'll have citizenship in one country and then get a residency in another one, because this makes the jurisdiction that they're taxable or that, they're under the thumb of, makes it kind of not as straightforward as others. So what some people do is they go to places like Paraguay, get a permanent residency, and then they could live there, or they could even live somewhere and get a tourist visa in, say Mexico or something like that, and have their citizenship in a third country. So that's the way that some people do it.
Right, and that makes sense if you have the resources that make it worthwhile. Although I've seen some people that really don't have, they have a simple life. They're a retired person that receives a pension, and trying to go to different countries and arrange all of these things seems not worth the effort compared to finding a country that you enjoy and relaxing in your retirement years. So again, it's something that I think is a very personal decision, and it's very good for some people, but other people, it's probably a distraction.
Glen, talk about the cost of living in Paraguay and maybe the differences between the cost of things in the U.S. and Paraguay. Can you?
No, I can't, because I haven't been to the United States for 12 years.
Very good point.
So I really have no idea what things cost there, though I think that Paraguay is a very comfortable place to live. The import rules seem to work well, so there's lots of high-tech equipment. I have no problem bringing vitamin supplements in, where in Uruguay it was always a hassle with customs for vitamin supplements, not just the taxes, but to receive them. I could compare some of the costs between Uruguay and Paraguay, but one example I can give is there's a restaurant, and it's one of the better restaurants here. It's all you can eat. There's a huge buffet. It includes sushi and everything you can imagine on a buffet. But they also grill meat, and they bring an endless supply of all kinds of different cuts of meat to your table. And there's a very nice dessert buffet to go with that. That costs, by the time you include a drink with it, about $18 US. And for me, that's an expensive place to go, mainly because it's way too much food. And I don't want to eat that much, so I pay a lot for the little that I do eat there. By comparison, in Uruguay, a simple meal, a meal with a pasta and a drink, will cost about $15 US. Wow. So the amount of food difference there is enormous. I purchased an apartment, a 3-bedroom apartment with about 100 square meters. So it'd be about 1,100 square feet and a parking garage spot for about the same price that a studio apartment in a similar neighborhood of Montevideo would have cost me. So there's I think, a very significant difference in the cost of living between Paraguay and Uruguay. Some of the negatives, the buses here are in very bad condition. And a bus fare is about 50 cents, where in Uruguay a bus fare is about $1. But the buses in Uruguay are nice to ride in. The buses here are they're like leftover from the junkyard.
I know that you've written this book here. What are some other ways that you or some other expats have found to make a living down there?
I think that many of the expats find work online, or they take their work with them through remote telecommuting type of thing. Many, of course, look for work locally and often find that very challenging. And I think one of the reasons is, first of all, we don't have the language skills. And even if we were fluent in Spanish, we're still an outsider. So it's hard to see that we would get a professional job over a local. Although I know one programmer who did get a very nice job because even though he didn't have the Spanish skills, he had some programming skills that were wanted. In Paraguay, I've run into quite a number of Americans that have lived here for a long time, for decades. And one of them that's been here for 40-some years, in his younger years, had bought a large ranch and operated it himself. And now he's been selling off parts, and somebody else does the actual farming. There's another one that's a interpreter and gets many jobs with professional organizations for their conferences and so forth. So it's really a matter of finding a place that you fit in that works for you.
What about you, Glenn? What's your background? What is your background, and what are you doing now, if you don't mind sharing with us?
My background has been with computers, and when I was in the United States, with being an activist on privacy issues, much before my time. Nobody was interested in those kind of issues at that time. And the computer and the privacy work sort of evolved into doing some web pages, and that's what's supported me in my time outside the United States. Now I'm looking at shifting to a simpler, more stress-free life, and looking at some additional titles to publish, and maybe shifting into a place where I can support myself from book royalties. Although from this point, that looks like it's still quite a ways off.
So is this the first book that you've, I guess you self-published, is that correct?
I self-published this. When I was in Uruguay, I put together, it was sort of a compilation of articles from a number of people, a guidebook for expats in Uruguay. And I'm now in the process of redoing that more as a serious book. And hopefully that will be out within about a month. And then I have some other ideas with topics that are, one of them is a little politically charged with some of my past experiences in the United States, but sort of looking at it more from an outside objective perspective of what I was trying to accomplish and why it failed and why it would have failed even if I had been successful, and sort of look at what I see as some of the political, cultural issues that are difficult for the United States and how my life has improved since I stepped out of that. And then after that, I see some work that's focused more on the things I've done, the changes I've gone through to shift from being an angry, fearful person into somebody that can simply relax and enjoy life without all of those worries of the world pulling me down.
That sounds great, Glenn. You know, James has been living in Mexico for some time and out of the United States for some time. I just moved here to Mexico about 5 months ago. And of course, you hear this statement that outside of the U.S. mostly, you know, you just relax, especially in Latin America, and there's much less stress. And you don't really see how it could be that extreme of a difference, but it is. I found the same thing here just in the short time I've been here. We have to go pretty soon, but we want to address this subject about the fact that you're actually stateless. So there are a number of people who renounce, but not all of them can say that they're actually stateless. Right now, you say international travel isn't an option for you because you don't have a passport. So what is your plan for that?
The United Nations has a treaty with a number of countries, which now includes, since July, includes Paraguay. And one of the obligations of that treaty is for the country that's a signature of the treaty, to provide a passport. It's not a passport, but it's a travel document that looks like a passport to the people without nationality, the stateless people within their territory.
So it looks like a passport, but it does not say Paraguay or any country on the front.
It says Paraguay, but it says that it's a travel document according to the 1954 convention, blah, blah, blah. And then it has an information page that's identical to a passport, but again, isn't indicating any nationality of Paraguay. And I'm now beginning the process of getting one of those. And I expect that it will be a slow, ongoing process, as it's something that Paraguay has only been a signature to the convention of for a couple of months, and certainly hasn't issued any of those travel documents yet.
Okay, I suppose you don't know yet, but I wonder if you can open a bank account or get driver's license and things like this with one of these documents. Or I guess maybe it's just strictly a travel document.
Well, it's going to look like a passport, except for what it says on the cover, really. I can get a bank account with my Paraguayan ID. And in fact, since I've lived in Paraguay, I haven't used my U.S. passport for anything, because I use my Paraguayan ID for any type of situation that requires ID.
Right.
But I did have an experience in a financial institution, and their application asked for nationality. And I explained to the man that I wasn't a U.S. citizen, and I gave him a copy of the certificate. And he read it, and he understood what I was saying. And then he went about his work on the computer, and he had written U.S. or North American for the citizenship. And then he asked me to sign the paper. And I said, I can't sign this because I'm not American. And I explained the certificate of loss of nationality again. And another clerk in the office was listening, and she agreed with everything I was saying. And so then he went to work on the computer again, and then he gave me the document, and he said, you need to sign this. And I said, well, I can't sign it because I'm not American. And I could see that the whole time he was processing how to deal with this. And then finally he said, okay, you were born in the United States. I said, yes. So he crossed it out on the form, and he wrote born in the United States.
That was easy.
I said, okay, that's true. I can sign it. I'm convinced absolutely that what he put in the computer system was that I was American. Right. But for my part, I wasn't willing to sign a paper saying I was American when I'm not. And what he puts in the computer is his business. The original application is specific, and they have copies of the certificate of loss of nationality. So it's an issue that probably comes up absolutely never here.
Okay, I mean, that's very interesting, and I think that we could talk a lot about that. Maybe we'll, in the future we can get back with you, and we'll just talk specifically about this stateless deal, because it's not just you, but there's a number. It's not a huge number, but there's some people that are, going about this route. Normally, people get several passports to try to make travel easier, or make it so that they're not beholden to only one government. But you guys have taken the opposite approach and now have no citizenships, which I think is very interesting and something that a lot of people don't think is possible. So that's definitely something we want to talk about in the future.
And I believe that right now I'm aware of 3 living ex-Americans that have no nationality. And in the past, they weren't American, but some very famous people became stateless. Albert Einstein, for 5 years, he renounced his German citizenship and was without for 5 years. Karl Marx, at age of, in his 20s, he renounced his citizenship and was without citizenship until he died. And Friedrich Nietzsche, the author, again in his 20s, renounced his citizenship and was without for the remainder of his life. So it's something that's not common, but it is something that some very important people in the past have done.
Well, thanks so much, Glen. We've been talking with Glen Lee Roberts, author, activist, internet pioneer, author of How to Renounce Your U.S. Citizenship in 2 Easy Steps. He just outgrew the United States with no more of the fear culture. He finds he's simply happier now in Paraguay. He stresses that renouncing is a very personal decision, and if you want to do it, you should just do it. Thank you so much for joining us, Glen.
Thank you.
You bet. So, what did you think about Glen Lee Roberts? Do you object to anything he had to say? Did something not sound right to you? Do you have any comments on it? Do you have any other recommendations about other guests that would be right for the Borderless podcast? Well, this is what we'd like you to do. First of all, we'd like you to go to borderlesspodcast.com. Great big button right there. You can't miss it that says Join the Borderless Movement. The one thing that'll do is give you access to our private Facebook page where you can get in on the conversation here. We also have a free gift for you for doing that as well. The other thing we would really love you for is if you went over to iTunes, found our Borderless podcast on it, subscribe, rate, and review it. That helps us out a great deal. Join us again for our next Borderless podcast.
Thanks for joining us for the Borderless Podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders.